Okay, so today we're going to start section 6. We do have a quiz on section 6 on Thursday. So notice the heading or the title of this section are other types of equations. So back in section 4 of chapter 1, we did linear equations and we did quadratic. So today we're going to cover rational equations. So we've already covered rational expressions. The difference now is we're adding in an equal sign. So what our first goal here is going to be to factor any denominators if they need to be factored, and then we need to find a common denominator. Now remember when we did the rational expressions, when we found a common denominator, everything needed to be represented. I couldn't just add in a number, it's always being in terms of multiplication. So in this problem, I could see that my common denominator is going to be the 4, and it's also going to be the x plus 1. Now, under this x over here, you could put a 1 if you need to see that. So let me just rewrite this. You don't have to, but I'm going to rewrite my equation here. And then I'm going to multiply the entire equation by the common denominator. So again, my common denominator is representing everything. So it's going to be the 4. And it's also going to be the x plus 1. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm basically distributing this common denominator to each term. And I'm trying to cancel out the denominator of what's in here. So this, notice when I multiply the 4 times the x plus 1, the 4 in the bottom cancels with this, and then I'm left with the x plus 1 that I have to distribute. So x plus 1 times 4x plus 3. I'm now going to distribute the red 4 times x plus 1 to the middle one. Notice what cancels is going to be the x plus 1. So then now what would remain that I would distribute to that 2x is the 4. So minus 4 times the 2x. Now I have to distribute to the last term. So now if I take the 4x plus 1 and go here, notice it needs everything. So what's going to get distributed here is I'm going to multiply the x to the whole thing, the 4 and then the x plus 1. So really I could erase this and just make this a 4x. That I would distribute, because what was here was x, and then what was in front here was x plus 1. So I could actually flip it around, and now I'm going to distribute a 4x. All right, so now I need to FOIL the blue. So this becomes 4x squared plus 3x plus 4x plus 3. I can combine the middle and make this 4x squared plus 7x plus 3. For the green, I'm just going to multiply this, and I get minus 8x. Then for the red, I'm going to distribute the 4x, and I get 4x squared plus 4x. So by multiplying each term by that common denominator, it clears or gets rid of the denominator by canceling out what it already has. So now I'm going to start combining my like terms. So notice here I've got a 7x and a negative 8x. So this side becomes 4x minus x plus 3. Then I'll just drop down this side. Now that everything has been simplified on either side, now I can start moving the terms together. So let me try to get my x squared terms together. So when I go ahead and try to subtract 4x squared, notice it cancels on both sides. So now I'm left with negative x plus 3 equals 4x. Now I'm at a point where I'm just solving for a linear equation here. I'm just solving for x, so I could add x. 3 equals 5x. Divide by 5. and x equals 3/5. Now, I need to make sure that this answer that I just got does not make any of my denominators a 0. So let me go back. Really, the easiest way to do this is to just take your common denominator. And my common denominator was 4 times x plus 1. So what I would do is set 4 equal to 0, which doesn't help me. There's no x to solve for. And then I would do x plus 1, and it can't be a 0. So I set it not equal to 0. So if my x were to equal -1, it would make my equation undefined. Because let's come up here and look at it. The original equation, if I plug in a 1 here, what's, I'm sorry, -1, what's -1 plus 1? 0, right? So if x equals 0, -1, this makes this a 0 and it's undefined. But the x value that I got was 3/5. So because it wasn't this number, it checks out, it's good to go. Because 3/5 does not make any of my denominators, when I plug it in here, it doesn't make anything a 0. So I'm good. Now, if it did make the denominator 0, then my answer would be no solution here. And that's what's going to happen on my next example. So again, I need to find a common denominator here. And you can see that it's going to be the x minus 4. So let me just rewrite it. So I'm going to multiply the whole thing by that common denominator. So again, you're distributing it to that term. Notice it cancels. So now there's nothing to multiply. So you would just write x. Then the next one, I'm going to distribute it to this one. Same thing happens. They cancel. So I just leave the 4. Now the last term, though, when I distribute it over here, it needs everything. So I'm going to distribute 4, the original 4 that's here, to the x minus 4. So drop down the x, drop down the 4, distribute the 4, and now begin your solving process. Combine your like terms here. 4 minus 16 is going to give me -12. I'm going to move the 4x over. I get -3x equals -12. Divide both sides by -3. And x equals 4. So now I need to make sure that if I were to plug this back into my original problem, if I put that answer here, what happens to that first fraction? It makes the denominator 0. Now, the easiest way is just take your common denominator, set it not equal to 0, and this is what x can't be. So if you were to have gotten x equals 4, then your answer is no solution. And that's what we got. So this answer to this problem is no solution, because this answer makes the bottom of one of my, actually two of the terms a 0. So when it makes any of the terms, all it takes is 1. If it makes any of them a 0 in the denominator, your answer, you throw it out, and it's no solution. Let's try the next one. Again, common denominator here. Notice that last term, or the answer, I need to factor that thing. So I'm going to factor the x squared minus 4. I'm going to change it into x plus 2, x minus 2. So now let me rewrite the problem. So again, remember your common denominator needs to represent everything. So my common denominator is going to be x plus 2 and x minus 2. So you can see the first fraction already has the x minus 2. So what I need to distribute to here is just the x plus 2. That's what it's lacking. And it had a 3 already there in the numerator. Then the next term, it's missing the x minus 2. So when I distribute it here, it's really just 1 times x minus 2. I really don't need to show the 1 times. And then the last already has everything it needs. So I'm just going to rewrite the 12. So I'm going to distribute 3x plus 6. The green just becomes x minus 2. And then the equals 12. I'm going to simplify my left side here. So 3x plus 1x is 4x. And then 6 minus 2 is 4. Subtract the 4. Divide by 4. And x equals 2. Again, we need to check it. Again, fastest way is just to take the denominators, set them not equal to 0, because this is what x cannot be. So x cannot be negative 2, and x cannot be positive 2. If it is, it makes my fractions undefined. So again, notice I got x equals 2, so my answer here again is no solution. Next one, we need to factor all 3 denominators. So the first one, I can factor this into x minus 1 and x plus 2. The middle one is the difference of 2 squares. So this will become x plus 1, x minus 1. The last one, I'm going to factor a GCF of 2 out first. Should always look for a GCF first. So I can divide everything by 2, make it x squared plus 3x plus 2. Now it's a little bit more reasonable to factor. So factors of 2 are going to be x plus 1, x plus 2. Now, let me rewrite everything with their new denominators. So 3, and this one is x minus 1, x plus 2. The middle one, x plus 1, x minus 1. And the last one, 2, and then x plus 1, x plus 2. Now remember, our common denominator needs to represent everything we see, but we don't repeat anything. So I'm going to be multiplying by an x minus 1. Takes care of this one. Then I'm going to multiply it by an x plus 2. Takes care of this one. Now next one is x plus 1. I've already represented the x minus 1. The next term I come to is the 2. And then I've already represented the x plus 1 and the x plus 2. All right, so now that I've got my huge common denominator here, now I distribute it to each term. Notice in the first term that has the 3 in the numerator, the things that it's lacking are the 2 and the x plus 1. The next term, the 1, what it's missing is going to be the 2. We'll do that in green. So it's missing a 2, and it's also missing the x plus 2. So now, the 7. This one is only missing the x minus 1. So now let me multiply stuff. So 3 times 2 is 6, and now I'll distribute the 6. So 6x plus 6. Over here, I could distribute or multiply negative 1 times 2. So then this distributes as a negative 2x minus 4 equals 7x minus 7. Group your like x's, so that becomes a 4x. Group your like 6 minus 4, and I get plus 2. Drop down this side, and now begin to put your terms together. So I'm subtracting 7x, negative 3x. It doesn't matter if you would have moved the 4 over, we're still going to get the same answer. Negative 3x equals negative 9. Divide by negative 3, and x equals positive 3. Remember, we got to go back and check. And remember, we had a huge denominator. So 2 cannot equal 0. That's nonsense. We didn't have any x to solve for. But then we have x plus 1 not equal to 0. X minus 1 not equal to 0, and x plus 2 not equal to 0. We can already see that this one is going to be negative 1, positive 1, negative 2. My answer was x equals 3, so it checks. It doesn't make any of the bottom of any of my fractions a 0, so it's a good answer. Next one, common denominator here. Again, before you do that, you need to factor this denominator. I could pull a GCF out of x. All right, so here you can see that your common denominator, let me rewrite it, is going to be x and x plus 1. So that's what I'm going to multiply everything by. The first fraction already has the x plus 1, so I'm going to distribute an x to the 4x plus 3. Then the next one, it's got an x, so that x is gone. So then I just distribute 2 with x plus 1. And then the last term has everything it needs, so I just leave the 1. Let me distribute. So the red becomes 4x squared plus 3x. The blue becomes 2x plus 2. Oops, not equal 0. Equals 1. All right, so combine like terms here. I get 4x squared plus 5x plus 2 equals 1. Subtract the 1. So here we go again with section 1-4 that you just took a test on. We now have a quadratic equation that I need to factor. Now, if this couldn't have been factored, then I'd have to complete the square or use quadratic formula. However, this one can be factored. Factors of 4 that give me 5 are going to be 4 and 1. So this will factor into 4x plus 1 and x plus 1. Again, set each factor equal to 0. Same thing you did on the test yesterday. Solve for x minus 1 for x equals negative 1. Divide by 4, and x equals negative 1/4. Come over here, solve this one. Now, I still have to check it. Sometimes when you have a quadratic that you factor, sometimes both answers will work. Sometimes both answers will fail. Sometimes one will work. So let's see which one of these will work. So again, take your denominator, which was the x times the x plus 1. Set each piece of this not equal to 0. And we can see that when x equals 0, or if x equals -1, it doesn't work. And notice we got -1 as one of our answers. So that one is out of here. And the good answer is -1/4. Yes?
How did you get 4x plus 1 times x plus 1?
I factored the trinomial, so I guess and tested. You could also do the whole factor by grouping. This was fast enough where factors of 4 were either 4 and 1 or 2 and 2, but the factors of 4 that would give me 5 were 4 and 1. So I just did it by guess and test, but you could also have factored it by grouping. Last example, here we go. So again, common denominator. I can see here that my common denominator is going to be 2x minus 3 squared. Actually, I've been writing it in the front. Let me move it to the front. So 2x minus 3 squared. So when I distribute it to the first term, it needs the whole thing. So it'll be 6 times 2x minus 3 squared. The next one is only missing one of the 2x minus 3's. And then the last term has everything it needs. So just plus 3. Now, for the black part, remember I can't distribute the 6 first. I need to follow order of operations. So I need to do the exponent first. So really what I need to do here is FOIL this thing. Now, if you go ahead and expand it, you could distribute the 6 now to one of them. But I'm going to FOIL it first, and then I'm going to go back and distribute the 6. So I get 4x squared minus 6x minus 6x plus 9. I still have the 6 out front to distribute. So let me distribute, and I get 24x squared. This will be a 12x, negative. So then this becomes negative 72x plus 54. Over here, the blue becomes 14x minus 21. And then I have the plus 3. So I'm going to go ahead and group my negative 21 and 3. And I get negative 18. Again, I'm going to have a quadratic that I need to factor. So I'm going to subtract 14x. 24x squared minus 86x plus 54 equals negative 18. Move the 18. 24x squared minus 86x plus 30 plus 72 equals 0. All right, I need to factor this thing, but I notice that all 3 terms are even, so I could pull a GCF out. I'm going to divide everything by 2. So 24 divided by 2 is 12. 86 divided by 2 is 43. And 72 divided by 2 is 36. All right, I don't have any more GCFs left to pull out, so I got to factor this big thing. Again, you could do guess and test, or you could factor by grouping. I'm going to do it by guess and test, so I'm going to pull the factors of 12 as 3 and 4. And then I'm going to try the factors of 36 are going to be 9 and 4. Middle term's negative, and the last term's positive. So this will FOIL back to the thing right above it, and then if you distribute the 2, it does go back. Now, we could do factor by grouping, whatever method you want to use to factor this thing. Now, after it's factored, just like you did on the test yesterday, you have to set each piece equal to 0. So this 2 equals 0 doesn't do anything for me. There's no x to solve for. But then I now take this one, 3x minus 4 equals 0. Then this one, 4x minus 9 equals 0. Solve each one. 3x equals 4. divide by 3. So my first possible answer is 4/3. Then the next one, add 9. 4x equals 9, divide by 4, and x equals 9/4. Again, we need to do the check. So let me go ahead and see what my denominator was. And my denominator was the 2x minus 3. It was squared, but I just need to do one of them. So add 3. 2x, divide by 2. X cannot be 3/2. So because I did not get 3/2 for any of my answers, both of them work. So the answer is 4/3 and 9/4. So this actually had 2 solutions, and they both changed. Okay, so your homework for this part of lesson 1-6 is 7 through 25 odd. And again, on Monday, we'll do day 2 of section 6, and it'll be the 1-6B homework. So that's it.